Yoga Philosophy for Everyday Living, a podcast to bring the ancient wisdom of yoga to inform your everyday living on and off the mat. Hi, I am your host, Monica Phillips. So often we sabotage ourselves because of the chatter in our heads. This podcast will take you through the 8 limbs of yoga with leading yoga instructors and introduce you to executives who have brought yoga into their lives so they can thrive. Please listen, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Welcome. I'm here with Nishanth Selvalingam, and yay! I'm so glad to be here with you. We are in YogaWorks 300-hour teacher training. We're finishing our last couple of weeks, and I love how you share your knowledge in the classes. And I was so excited to invite you to share more of that on this video podcast. So thank you for being here.
It is an honor, Monica. I've so much enjoyed sitting with you and your energy. Also, when you mentioned you're doing a podcast, I was so excited. I'm so humbled.
You do so much. And I just learned you teach middle school speech and debate.
Yeah.
Incredible. You are a musician. You play, at least, I can see from the background, a few different kinds of guitar.
I make a pretense of being able to play that thing, but yeah, I have a deep love for guitar playing.
Your grandfather runs an ashram in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah, so my grandfather, he has always been a very devoted Shaivite, meaning follower of the god of yoga, Shiva. What he ended up doing was he created an annex in our house. So we have like our family home. And then he created an annex in our house because he was starting to get very deep in his practice in his later years. So he wanted a kitchen that was a purely sattvic kitchen where he could cook meals that were wholly sattvic and he could offer them as prasadam to the deities, like an offering. And he wanted a space where he could just sit, pray, meditate, sing, because he was very big into chanting. He was a temple singer. What ended up happening was there was some temple politics that caused him to move away from our neighborhood temple. So that's why he started his little annex. That little spot, he would invite people every week to come and learn. They'll get lectures and that kind of thing. So it was a very beautiful space of learning and spiritual congregation. As a child, though, he sat me down and he had me memorize the scriptures and sing the Siva Puranam. And I was kind of bored.
Okay, I have to spend this time with my grandpa.
I really loved it. He was in my childhood my best friend. I spent the most time with my grandfather. He would teach me Tamil and talk to me about his life in Sri Lanka. It was all really great. That's kind of his project.
And that sounds amazing. So what is the difference between a temple and an ashram?
Temple is a more formal structure. It usually is more elaborate in its architecture. A big spire often in South Indian style temples, and you circambulate the temple and there are different deities and each temple is consecrated usually to one deity or like a family around that deity. The glory days of Kashmiri Indian civilization, the temple, much like an Egyptian temple, was a place not just for ritual worship but also for social affairs. There would be mathematicians and legal professionals and you would go to the temple kind of like the center of social life. An ashram is a little smaller scale. It's usually associated to one or maybe a family of teachers. It's usually somebody's house. Ashram or ashrama literally means school or place of learning. And you go there for more specific instruction. So they share similar functions. They're different in scale. The temple just has broader range of functions.
Well, thank you for that. So we're going to talk mostly about yoga's journey from east to west. I know the Swami Vivekananda, I'm probably saying that not quite right, but he came in 1893 and he spoke at the World's Fair in Chicago. Yes. And that's kind of the mark of what we know as the launch of yoga in the United States. Tell me more about that journey.
I think we have to start actually, not to pull you all the way back to 3,800 BC, but I think we do have to start there because the journey of yoga to the West is encapsulated in the line that we find in the Rigveda book, not book, but text 164. And the line goes, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuddha Vadanti. The Sanskrit there translates to truth is one, though sages call it differently. At the core of the Vedas and at the core of the Upanishads, which as you know is the foundation for yoga philosophy, there is already this kind of syncretic concession that truth is a singular experience. It's not a concept. It's not a dogma or a belief. And Jesus would later articulate this in Matthew when he says, I am the truth. He didn't say, I know the truth. He said, I am the truth, the way, and the life. There's this concession that truth is an experience and you can describe that experience in different ways. So that already sets the stage for the interaction between Indian spiritual practitioners and subsequent interactions. I know Alexander the Great invades and doesn't get all the way into India, but there's a historian, Diodorus Siculus, who talks about interactions between the philosophers of Greece and the northern Indian philosophers known as the gymnosophist or naked philosophers, essentially yogis.
As you're saying this, I'm thinking, was it easier for people 5,000-6,000 years ago to connect to truth and spiritual connection, samadhi, because we had fewer distractions? Wondering if we have taken ourselves too far into perception that is not true.
Unfortunately, I can't really comment on that because I wasn't around around 530 BC. So I'm not really sure what life conditions were like back then. Scripturally speaking, when we consider the yugas or the ages, much like the Greek notion of like the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, there are different moments or epochs in which our spiritual maturity is at different levels or different degrees of transparency to truth. The reason Hatha Yoga in the 12th century becomes necessary is largely because of urbanization. And now a lot of people are living in cities. And today we have the braying of the taxi cab and the public transport. Back then it was the braying donkey. At the same time, you're living in a city now. Life is busy. You're probably stressed. So there was methods of purification, namely the Shatkarmas and Hatha Yoga and Asana and Pranayama. All of that prepared you for the task that seems to have come so easily to our predecessors.
Okay, because I was thinking Patanjali talks about asana as the third step in the 8 limbs to enlightenment, but it was different then?
Yeah, because remember, Patanjali's version of asana means a meditation seat. Because the word asana from the Sanskrit root asi means to sit. So even pose is not a good translation, or posture, because it really does mean a very sedentary thing. Scholar Harish Wallace argues in his book Tantra Illuminated, in Tantra or 9th or 10th century Indian philosophy, the word asana no longer even had the connotation of a literal meditation seat, more so meant the lotus seat that your deity sits in, a device for meditative visualization, if you will. So in Tantra, there was a dance that was often performed in states of rapture. When you performed a tantric ceremony, if the ceremony was successful, you would be imbibed with the Holy Ghost. And often you would break out into spontaneous dance and hand positions. These were called the Karana. So a pose like Viparita Karani is one of the oldest names because in the beginning, you didn't have asana, you had dance, you had Karana.
Do we call them mudras then also?
A mudra, by the way, meaning seal, is not just in the hands, it's the whole body.
The whole body.
Technically, every asana is a mudra.
Oh, cool.
You'll see in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika concepts like Mahamudra, which means the great attitude.
Are you familiar with this? The power pose, been seen millions and millions of times, and it's all about the power pose. And people were talking about this recently. Connections in Light were talking about it on LinkedIn. What's your power pose? How do you take it? How does it help you? And I do think there is a sense of in yoga feeling your energy is a big part of it. And so then we were talking about our favorite power poses, and someone talked about a lawyer who's a yogi, talked about what he does on a plane when he's seated, mountain pose, he was joking. I just talked about a seated forward fold. There's so much power for me in letting go. And it's so interesting to think that all those are also seals, mudras, and it gives us strength.
The power pose, the sass of when you study great saints, Ananda Mahima or Sri Ramakrishna, who is Vivekananda's teacher, they often break out into spontaneous mudra and asana. They've never got an instruction in those things. They just do it because that's how the body deals with onslaught of psychic energy coming in a samadhi state. Matsyendranath in the 12th century starts to formulate the practice of asana. It's interesting because we today think that asana is a tool to become spiritual, but really asana is an expression of the spirituality you already are. So you don't perform asana as a practice to get somewhere. You perform it as an expression of your innate, already enlightened state.
That's beautiful. So in Patanjali's 8 limbs, why do you think it comes third?
The thing about Patanjali is that here's the confusing thing about Yoga Sutra. Patanjali, before he puts the Yoga Sutra together, is a grammatician. So he teaches grammar. When he teaches the Yoga Sutra, it's not, I think, as formulaic or systematic as we make it out to be. So when we say Ashtanga Yoga, there's this idea that Patanjali is providing us this complete system. But not really, because he seems in other places to say one of those limbs is enough to be considered the whole of yoga. One sutra, he says, Ishvara Pranidhana is all you need, devotion. And in that, he's talking about bhakti yoga. Then in other places, he's talking about jnana yoga, and in some mantra yoga. It's not so much, I think, helpful to see Patanjali Yoga Sutra as a system, although it's tempting to do so. Patanjali is a dualist, and so his philosophy I find a little lacking. I think as a technical manual, it's good. As a philosophical manual, it's a little weak. And the reason why is because he doesn't reconcile how Purusha and Prakriti are linked. For that, you need to go to Tantra. And I think it only helps insofar as you contextualize Patanjali in the wider scope of philosophical systems like Sankhya compared to non-dual Shaiva Tantra, etc. It's a world. It's a pretty big world.
So we were talking before a little bit about the religious nature of yoga. Yoga exists on its own outside of any religion, and it exists within Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism exists without yoga. I found this quote by Swami Vivekananda. He says, "To the worker, it is union between men and the whole of humanity. To the mystic, between his lower and higher self. To the lover, union between himself and the God of love. And to the philosopher, it is union of all existence." This is what is meant by yoga. And I read in that it can be our own path, just like you said in the asana, it can be our own path and expression of our own spirituality. How do you see that? And you talked about it with this oneness of the Rigvedas. How do you see that in religious terms?
Yeah, no, that's a really beautiful Vivekananda quote. I love that one because truly, yoga is kind of like a non-word. It just comes to connote whatever. I think the Indic philosopher George Furstein makes the point that before the word yoga was used, its stand-in word was tapasya or tapas, which means austerity. So I think in the kind of cultural understanding of Indian spirituality, yoga is austerity practice. It's a practice that is used to get to a certain state. However, Patanjali uses the word yoga not as a practice, because for him, the word for practice is sadhana. Yoga for him is a state or an attainment. That's the sense in which Vivekananda talks about yoga. The state whereby you have union with whatever it is you're trying to unite. For Patanjali, it was union between the knower and the known, or the meditator and the object of meditation. But for the karma yogi, a person who works selflessly in the world, it's that moment where they really feel in their service, where their sense of self dissolves into a greater cause, and they're looking across the soup kitchen table into the eyes of the person they're serving, and they see their own eyes reflected back to them.
That's so beautiful.
In a bhakti yoga center, you're singing to your beloved Jesus maybe, and you're singing, and for a moment, you dissolve completely into the object of your adoration. That's yoga. That's why I think Vivekananda and a lot of philosophers use that word as broadly as possible. Because it's not one thing, nor is it one practice.
It's interesting you share that. I've had a couple of major pivotal moments in my yoga practice or my yoga journey. And one was, so I started, my mom practiced yoga. So I knew about it as a kid. It wasn't something I really looked into that much, but we had the Bhagavad Gita and I would read here and there, but never seriously. I didn't take my first class in a studio until I lived in Paris in my 20s. When I was 37, I went to a class in San Francisco it was then Urban Flow. It was Yoga for the People with Stephanie Schneider, and it was Bhakti Flow. And I took this class, and I was joking with a friend before because the studio was so well regarded. I was living in Washington, D.C., and everyone there was, oh, you know, Rusty Wells and Stephanie Schneider, to my friend who had been practicing with them regularly. So I go, okay, I have to go see what this class is all about. Yoga for the people, and everyone shows up with $200 clothes and $200 mats and this and that, but this is yoga for the people, right? Okay, definitely had some judgment. And I got there, and everyone was so grateful of gratitude. I could just feel it. And there was this sense of, wow, we get to be here. We get to show up on our mats. We get to practice. And then I felt it. I felt this letting go. And it was incredible. I was hooked, instantly hooked. And I was, oh, Bhakti Flow. Okay. And then in 2017, I went on a yoga retreat to an ashram. Part of it was this series of waking up at 5 a.m., meditating, then practicing asana, then eating breakfast. And we had lectures during the afternoon. And then we had another practice and meditation in the evening. And it was really a beautiful process. It was not the sweaty, I'm going to work out and have a thin waist practice that I had been used to experiencing. And I realized how I had to let go even more of this physical self. I had to let go of what I was trying to get in my waistline. Just it became what was inside of me. Yes. And that's when I decided that I probably did want to become a yoga teacher.
When you connected to the deeper vibration of yoga, that essence of asking, who am I beyond the mind and the body?
Yeah, completely.
Christopher Wallace makes this great point. He says yoga, without the theory and understanding of what it's about, is quite dangerous because yoga will just give power to you. So if you're a jerk, it makes you a more effective jerk. As you can see with many instances of yoga teachers who are strong in body and mind, who have charismatic personalities, but don't have that deeper. And I see this now in our modern day new age culture healing trap. We're all trying to heal, but it seems like a veiled attempt at self-perpetuity that the ego loves to have. So if you're not building a monument or taking other people's land so you can be alive forever, you're trying to create a body and a mind that's immortal. Yeah, it can be a trap. But you felt in your own practice that there's some kind of sweetness, there's a beauty in completely letting go of this clinging that we have to our personality, to our mind, to our body.
Exactly. That's where the beauty of life comes in, that we can see more clearly everything.
You know, Monica, I would say that is the origin of yoga's journey to the West. That vibration that exists in the Vedic era gives this culture, this tradition, a sort of power that's allowed it to interact well. Because when the Muslim invasion of 12th century happened, there were people fighting it and there was a lot of religious oppression, sure. But there were also poets like Kabir. And I think the story of yoga to the West must involve poets like Kabir because they were syncretic poets. They talked about Allah and Atman interchangeably because they could see that in Islam, there were ideas that were concurrently true. You have Kabir and then the British invasion. So with Vivekananda, you start the story with Ramakrishna because Sri Ramakrishna was he's our foremost saint. We call him the modern avatar. What makes Ramakrishna special is that he first achieved enlightenment or nirvikalpa samadhi with a tantra female teacher. Then he went on to achieve it with a Vaishnava male teacher. Then he went on to do it with a non-dual teacher. He realized every version of Hinduism, or in that time, Indian spirituality, was legit. It all took him to the same place. So he went and he gave up all of his Hinduism. He wore Muslim clothes, hung out with Muslims, and prayed exclusively at the mosque. So he became, in effect, a Muslim, and he became enlightened that way. And he tried it with Christianity. And so in a sense, he is the first world teacher because he truly went deep in every religion and found them all to lead to the same experience of yoga, which is oneness.
In religion, there's a lot of argument about what came first.
Right.
I say that and then I think, I don't know if that's true anymore. I guess it is. I know enough Christians and Muslims, at least, who will argue about their religion being more important than others. I don't know any Hindus who say that, actually.
Good observation, Monica. A big part of that is because Hinduism is like kind of a misnomer. The word Hinduism is a word coined by colonial England to group together a lot of different schools of thought with very big differences between them. For instance, as a Shaiva Tantra practitioner, I do not practice dualistic forms of worship. Though I do, but a Vaishnava does. One is dualistic, one is non-dualistic, yet we're both called Hindus.
Even just in your description of Patanjali and understanding how that informs how we show up and practice or what we know about our practice.
There's a unity in diversity, as Vivekananda said. That is the motto of the Indian. So Ramakrishna is an exemplar of that. He's a role model. And when you went and studied with Ramakrishna, he would speak to you in terms of your own faith. So if you were a Muslim, he would talk to you in terms of Allah and the Quran.
It's so smart because when we tell someone they're wrong and we take this approach of we push them away. But when we invite them in and we acknowledge their truth, and we invite them in to learn more, they get curious about the world and what's possible globally. And even the sense of the yoga, the unification of all of these different ways we've shown up. And I think in the religious transitions, there were different Jesus, Prophet Muhammad, different people who came forward and they all spoke to Moses, right? So there were these unifying forces throughout where they all acknowledge the existence of each other. No one ever says, oh, no, that never happened. They just maybe don't call it the same thing.
Precisely. They have different languages and most of them are trying to point beyond the concept. The Buddha says, do not confuse the finger pointing at the moon with the moon itself. So the map is not the territory, or the religion, which is a set of symbols, is not the thing to which those symbols are pointing to. And even Jesus says, beware the brood of vipers. They say, Lord, 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 yet they know me not. The idea that there are many people who claim to be religious, but they're using it as a machine for power and control, etc. So in every religion, there's always been a caste of people known as mystics or the esoterics. And in Islam, we call them Sufis. In Hinduism, we call them yogis. In Buddhism, we maybe call them Zen, Tibetan Buddhists maybe. So there's always kind of a sect in every major world religion that is preaching this universality.
It sounds like those sects, the mystics, have come together to create more than what's possible with one.
And we recognize each other. You go to the marketplace and you look into someone's eyes and you see in their eyes a presence and you know therein lies one who is awakened. And we're doing the work together. Interestingly, Ramakrishna was that voice in India. He was a unifying voice, and you couldn't have Gandhi without Ramakrishna or Vivekananda. He was the lifeblood of Indian unity and getting together. So Vivekananda, he grows up with a father who is a lawyer, who's very interested in Islamic art and Islamic poetry. So his father was a man of the world, very broad-minded, and his mother was a lover of the Indian epics, Mahabharata and Ramayana. And so Vivekananda was already raised in a syncretic kind of household. As a youth, studied, because it was British colonial era, just about the advent of British education in India, he started to study Western philosophy and rationalism and rigorous deductive reasoning. And he saw that a lot of India's social ills came from the dogmas of the Vedic religion. There was a lot of backward social mores of the time. There was a rigid caste system in place that prevented all social mobility. The idea that India is some spiritual utopia isn't true. It degenerated. And there was a time when this beauty of the Vedic era, a time of truth and poetry, turned into this degenerate, caste-ridden, we call it Brahmanism, where even the people who were the priest didn't know the meaning of their rituals. India had fallen asleep. And so without the British invasion to slap us on the wrist, we might have degenerated into senility. So thankfully, Vivekananda was educated as a British person, so he became very critical. That was important because when he met Ramakrishna, he was able to bring that Western grounded reasoning and combine it with his innate Indian spirituality. He was a rare breed of rigorous philosopher, poet.
It's almost like if you can't see any trouble, you don't know why you're supposed to heal yourself.
Right. And he could see that. He could see the ills of his culture. And he knew that India, what it needed now most was not spirituality. It had lots of that. What India needed was what the West had, which is the ability to socially progress, technology, science, etc. What the West needed was not more of that. The West didn't need more luxury. The West needed the meaning for that luxury. So Vivekananda's thing was that he realized if he came to the West, he would create a brotherhood of humanity. A brotherhood and sisterhood of humanity. And that was his mission. So around the time of 1890s, he was walking around India. He was starting to see India's poor and he felt for them. He felt for the plight of the Indians. And he knew that the only way India was going to get help was if it showed itself on the world stage as having something to offer. So Vivekananda came to trade, believe it or not. He came to exchange spiritual lessons for material lessons that he could take back. In the words of Swami Vivekananda, if man is the most, or man and women are the most divine creations of God, then in both sides of the world, she is being crucified in different ways. In the East, she is being crucified with lack of social progress and technology. In the West, she's being crucified with lack of spiritual understanding.
It was kind of a turning point. And did it change the way India saw yoga at the same time?
Tremendously, because a lot of people in India at the time didn't think yoga was for them. It was something that the Brahmin elite practiced, and maybe a few wandering mendicant sadhus or people who had dropped out. So a lot of these people were held with respect and reverence. The culture of India has always, throughout its history, had a special place in its heart for spirituality. I mean, you can't take spirituality out of India. So people respected it. They would give money and alms to those sadhus, but they themselves didn't feel like they could access it, or they couldn't read the Sanskrit. So they didn't understand some of the theories. And Vivekananda comes from that school of Indian philosophy known as non-dualism, which suggests that there's only one thing, you are it. So the question, who am I and what is God, has the same answer because Brahman equals Atman, meaning yourself is the all. You don't find this in Patanjali's half-baked philosophy.
Right.
You know, Patanjali has this weird, everyone's got an individual Purusha, but then there is a Vishesha Purusha hanging out. I don't know. Patanjali doesn't really do a lot there. But Vivekananda, Ramakrishna, they point out that you, at your core, are the only thing that exists. And if you believe this, then gone is the caste system, because what separates the king from the beggar if in essence they both turn out to be this one thing? So it's a powerfully socially empowering idea.
Is there a sense of reincarnation in this journey?
There is, but it's not that important because it's seen as relatively true. In non-duality, this world is very dreamlike substance. If you were to study your states of consciousness, waking, dreaming, and sleeping closely, you will notice that in all three of those states of consciousness, there is one thing that stays the same, and that is you, the knower, or you, the witness. And you, the witness, is very different from the niche of the waking world, the niche of the dreaming world, and the no niche of the sleep world. So what I turned out to actually be is not my waking world niche, nor I am whatever rockstar fantasy I'm having in my dream, nor I am the absence of deep sleep. I am that which watches all three. So when you ask the question of reincarnation, who is it reincarnating? It's not me. It's Nish and Nish's energy body and his pranamaya kosha.
Wait, so you're not a rock star yet?
Nish the drunken monkey is.
So you have this stage name, Nish the Fish, is that right? Okay, tell us about that just for a minute, because I want to hear more about the music you play. I've watched a little bit. I'll share the link.
No, it's funny because while Vivekananda came to the West to teach yoga, I came to the West to play guitar in a rock band. That's why I came to LA. I just wanted to play guitar.
And now here you are merging the two, maybe through music.
I think so, because the temple, there's like a rock and roll in a temple, heavy music. And I found that with Sabbath and Zeppelin and all these heavy metal bands that were exploring spiritual themes. If you listen to Sabbath music, it's really spiritual. It is very biblical and it talks about God and it's pretty deep. So I love that stuff. And Nish the Fish is just a fun stage name that I have for my act. We're a three-piece. Just me, a bassist, and a drummer. And we used to play up and down the strip until everything closed down. We haven't played a show in some time. We tried a live stream a month ago and it just didn't feel the same. So we're not playing anywhere anymore, but we're still releasing stuff on Spotify and that kind of thing.
That's super cool. So the Beatles, they went on an extended stay to India with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, their guru, in 1968. And I think about these moments in connecting humanity. The Beatles were so mainstream, and so their recognition of yoga, I think, probably helped as well. Like there are these steps where we can say, the Beatles are doing it, why not me?
Yes. Yeah, precisely right. I love that observation, Monica, because you're right. At 1893, that was the moment where the first echo of yoga gets heard in the West. But then Paramahansa Yogananda comes, and this is the early 30s, sets up in California. And this is important because Lake Shrine in California and Pacific Palisades and all that, that is a little more, because Vivekananda came, went to England, came back, left, went to India. But Yogananda stayed and he left. So by the time you get to the early 60s, you already have a lot of people interested in Eastern ideas, especially since the material straitjacket of 50s America is starting to loosen and young kids are looking for ideas. So that hippie movement, really there's an influx, like Alan Watts has shown up. And you're right, the Beatles eventually as the cultural mouthpiece of the time, they can't help but be swept up by this. Ravi Shankar can't help but bring the forces of yoga, which are beyond you or me or any of the playthings of nations, brought together Ravi Shankar and George Harrison to study. And George Harrison, with a lot of respect and reverence, studied at the feet of Ravi Shankar. And Ravi Shankar, with a lot of respect and reverence, came and studied at the university here. That was a true sign of our cultures exchanging. Though with Maharishi Mahesh and the stuff like that, I think it started a guru phenomena, as well, because you had Yogi Bhajan come over with the Kundalini.
What is a guru phenomena?
An obsession with teachers. Sure. Have you seen The Love Guru? It's kind of
I haven't. Tony Robbins will say, right, I'm not your guru.
Yeah.
And every yoga teacher, I am not your guru. They say that it is not, I think, one person's job to be the guru for someone else. But we do have this, actually, even my yoga mentor, Tiffany Russo, she says, if you put yoga on a pedestal, it will fall off. Anything you put on a pedestal will fall off because anything you idolize so much will start to lose its luster. And maybe that's what happened in India when they were wanting this so much, then they forgot why they were doing it, because then they had it and then they didn't even realize what it was for.
Precisely. They turned the Buddha into a celestial king god figure and robbed him of his humanity. I mean, the Buddha was an ordinary man who had extraordinary question.
Practiced Hinduism.
He practiced with yogis. Call it Hinduism is anachronistic because the British hadn't shown up yet, so that word hadn't yet. Right. Definitely, he was a prince in northern India who, when he realized that old age, sickness, and death were a thing, he set out to study with yogis. They're known as samanas or maybe shamans.
Like sure. Okay.
And he realized that their way was totally off. because they were demonizing the body and the mind, which is what happens, by the way, with the dualism of Sankhya and Patanjali. Because in Patanjali, if you separate Purusha and Prakriti, and you see Prakriti as separate from Purusha, how long until people start demonizing Prakriti as an obstacle to Purusha? And you'll notice there's a lot of hatred of women that comes with dualistic schools, because you came into the existence through the womb of your mother. If you start to see this life as a bondage and a trap, then you will start to resent the womb of the mother, and you'll start to see every woman as an embodied. Notice that in Tantra, which develops Patanjali's philosophy, there is an embrace of the goddess. It's more into goddess worship and embodied forms of practice, asana and mudra.
But even the energy line of our body starts in Shakti, the feminine energy.
Exactly. That, I think, is mature Indian spirituality. So I kind of I'm trying to move away from Patanjali's philosophy and bring people more into the non-duality of Tantra.
Why do you think we study the sutras so much in yoga philosophy in the West?
You know, it beats me. I think the Hatha Yoga Pradipika would have made more sense.
I had that, I've read was a sign, but we didn't study it as much.
I have no idea why there's this obsession with the Yoga Sutra. It, as a textbook for meditation, there is no equal. It's an amazing textbook for meditation. It's Sadhanapada, has a lot of gems, the 4 locks and the 4 keys, that the self-help culture of the 70s eats that stuff.
I think you're right, because yoga in the West really had a deep connection with the hippie movement because they were open to new ideas. And so that even there is a strong association, because I live in California, a strong association with hippies and yoga. And look, I was raised by hippie parents. I know yoga. And so I think there is a deep connection. And then when I read the Upanishads, the sutras rather, there's so many beautiful moments. Even how we see truth, the 4 locks, 2, 3, 3. I love that one. I love so many of the sutras, and I'll read them and then I'll see these moments in pop culture. So do you know The Good Place?
I've heard a lot about this series. I haven't seen it.
It's a great show. It has so many interesting moments of wisdom. I really love it. Lots of coaching moments. There's this one moment, Jason's character, who's from Florida, not very smart. People make fun of him a lot. And the lead demon of The Good Place is talking, what, you were a failed dancer. You led a failed dance troupe. And he said, no, we weren't a failure. We were just pre-successful. I love his insights. He has these moments where he'll share something. And I think we try to make the person who has the most education from the best school, the smartest in the room. And it just takes one person who sees it differently to see the truth.
Precisely.
Because they're not hiding behind all of this education and layers that we add on. And so sometimes it's moments when you make it so simple. What if we all lived with that idea? Oh, I'm pre-successful. I love this idea that there's more for me and I can keep working on it. I can practice every day. I can show up and I can practice and I can enjoy the practice. And then maybe it will become more than that.
It's beautiful because you're right. It's refreshing, isn't it? When you get this simple outsider perspective and Vivekananda's speech, he got a standing ovation after his first sentence because he was the only one at the conference who didn't prepare a speech. He didn't sit down and write one. And so he addressed the audience as a human to another human. And he opened his speech with, and mark his phrase, he said, sisters and brothers, my sisters and brothers of America. It's sisters first.
Beautiful, right?
Isn't that beautiful? Because he learned that from Ramakrishna, the goddess worship, the love of the sacred feminine, Shakti. So he said, my sisters and brothers of America. He got a standing, thunderous ovation. He spoke to them with a simple, direct language. And I think that's what you're pointing out. We need that.
We do need that. So you said that visit changed yoga in India. What happened? I understand there isn't the same kind of asana practice in India.
See, asana, it's when you talk about hatha yoga and the practice of using poses and the shatkarmas, it's all very fringe because after all, you have to remember this was created by 9 scruffy, skinny fellows, the Nath school, and it was an underground indie rock yoga because this was the Muslims had invaded, all the temples were destroyed. So these fellows were underground. So it's really weird, right? The story of how Krishnamacharya gets interested in this niche underground thing. And then he goes to Tibet and he learns about it. And his Tibetan guru tells him to come back and teach it to the people. And then there's a Maharaja in Mysore who's obsessed with it because he likes British gymnastics. The story of how asana comes back into the Indian mainstream consciousness is a very interesting story. It happens in the courts of Maharajas who want to fetishize it almost in a way. Because it is cool to see people's bodies twist in all those ways. So India, I don't think had much use for that. They mostly practice chanting. Chanting is the core of India's spirituality. Almost every house has an altar, and almost every night at sundown, they will perform something known as the arti or puja, where they will wave light and sing. That's really what most people do. Some people meditate, but most people just sing.
You didn't grow up practicing hatha yoga.
Not at all, no.
Yeah.
My first asana was at age 17 or 16.
What was that like?
It was cool because, in a way, we're bouncing ideas off of each other, the East and the West. So I learned at my grandfather's feet all these ideas, but they weren't making sense to me. And then I saw Star Wars and I loved it because George Lucas was repackaging Eastern ideas. His Jedi Order is essentially... So even Master Yoda, Mace Windu, Mace Hindu, like it's all sort. But anyway, George Lucas is repackaging these ideas. I, as a kid, ate it up. I wanted to be a Jedi. I really identified with it because that's what the saints and sages looked like.
Isn't the Jedi mind trick the controlling of the mind, which is yoga chitta vritta narodi? I love Star Wars too, and I love making these connections with yoga.
So I was 14 and I got interested in Ram Dass, Terence McKenna, all those young, youthful 60s voices. So I got Be Here Now, and I loved it because it was a young Western way of packaging the stuff that I had heard in the Sanskrit that my Tamil lectures my grandfather gave me. So that made it more appealing to me. And at the back of Be Here Now, there's something called Cookbook for a Spiritual Life. There's a section on asana. And I was like, I'm going to give this a try. So I started practicing the asana and I was immediately hooked because I found them to be a powerful way. It's like rocket fuel for meditation. It helped me. And all of that set the stage when my mother took me to see Sai Baba in an ashram in Puttaparthi, India. This ashram is huge. There's a hospital and a university. Sai Baba is a saint. And we went. And that was where I think it happened for me. I was 14. I was sitting there and there was a bhajan hall where we all sang songs together. And I saw in the hall people from all over the world. There were Europeans there, there were Japanese there, it was the United Nations over there. We were all coming together to sing. It was like the Beatles song, Come Together. It was the ultimate hippie paradise. And everywhere you walked in the ashram, people would smile at you and say, hello. If you go to a Kundalini retreat, they're all saying Satnam, they do that. And something happened. I wrote a letter to Sai Baba and the letter was, what are you? Why are you a saint? What is God? What makes you special? I wrote almost these pretentious questions because I was very curious. And I paused right before I put the letter in the box. And something made me not put the letter in the box. I kept the letter. That day, we went home to the hotel and I bought my first copy of the Bhagavad Gita and started to devour it. So I think something happened at Sai Baba's ashram that created a new hunger in me.
I love that you talk about this, how you experienced it, because what I hear, and you said this word earlier, is access. When we create something in a way that allows another person to see it and absorb it, we give them an opportunity to learn. When we present information only, even with learning modalities, you're a teacher, some kids learn visually, some kids learn orally. You have to understand, even in touch, in asana practice, put your hands on your hips. Can you feel your pelvis? Is it parallel? So just feeling it in your body, this proprioception, right? When you make it accessible, when you show someone through music, then they might find a new connection to it differently than a lecture from an uncle or an auntie or something like that.
Yeah, precisely. You got to see things many different ways. And that's why I would encourage everyone to check out the Ramakrishna Mission's seal or its emblem. Vivekananda designed it. And the way it looks, there's a serpent and the serpent represents Kundalini or Hatha Yoga. It encircles a choppy ocean, which represents Karma Yoga or the yoga of selfless action. In the middle of the ocean, there is a lotus, which represents the devotion or bhakti aspect. On the horizon, there is a rising sun, which symbolizes philosophy or jnana yoga. And all of that culminates in the swan at the center. The swan is a symbol in India for a free soul or jivan mukti. So the idea there is that you cannot approach it from any one way. It takes a holistic learning where you do some bhakti, do some jnana, do some hatha, and you bring them all together to create, in an alchemical event, this liberation.
That's incredible. Tell us what you're teaching right now.
I currently teach 2 philosophy classes on Monday nights with a studio called StayOm Yoga. I teach at 7 p.m.
I love that name.
Yeah, StayOm Yoga is so great. My friend Annie started it.
Good, you came together in COVID times, I imagine.
It was my friend Ann Wasserman who started the project. She brought me on after she had started it. And we had this collective of teachers. A lot of them were fresh out of 200 hours. We were just a bunch of people. And we had kirtan singers. We had dance teachers. We had art teachers. It was great. But people started to kind of get busy and fall off until there were only two teachers left, me and my friend Emily Anderson. So Annie went up to Yosemite to work on a recipe book for peanut butter based cuisines. While she's working on a recipe book, she handed over StayOm Yoga to me to watch over for a while. That's cool. Yeah. My friend Dawn Stillo, who is a YogaWorks teacher, she and Jennifer started a studio called Jennifer Elliott. They're both YogaWorks teachers. They started a studio called Yoga World Heart. It's another virtual studio. Yeah. They were kind enough to give me a slot on Thursday teaching philosophy. So I do that every Thursday night, 7:30 with Yoga World Heart. That class is a little more heavy. It's a little more technical.
Well, and if you would like a more deep dive on yoga philosophy, you have an incredible hour just from a couple of weeks ago, I believe, that I was listening to that is a great deeper dive on the whole yoga philosophy journey from east to west.
Right. Yes. The deepest ideas in yoga, I call it.
I kind of got to derail you a little bit with other questions. This has been amazing. Anything else you'd like to share?
Maybe in closing, just going back to that Rigveda quote, that truth is one, though sages call it differently. The only thing I would love to say to everyone is just that all religions and even all scientific schools all look different on a surface level. But a deep study of any one shows a coherence and a unity that can be found in all of them. And if anybody still feels, no, this is different, I invite them to come and have a conversation, and I will do my best to show them that it's not.
And it's this deep human need to know, what are we? Where do we come from? Why am I here? What is this all for? How did we get here? How did this all happen? It all was there. Exactly. And how do you see yourself in the world? What do you want What do you want your experience to be in this oneness?
And then one day we can look into each other's eyes and we can realize that it's just us looking at us. And there's this feeling of there's no other. There's a perfect unity. Now I get to appreciate Monica, which is a specific form that the infinite took to express a specific divine mission that is mine too. And that just makes me so excited about everything you're doing, because to support you in what you're doing comes from a place of knowing that it's selfish. It's what I'm doing in the form of Monica. And then we can look at each other and really be in love. Not fall in love in that possessive way of otherizing, but really be in love together, which is to be in that space where there's no self, just you and me.
I could keep talking with you forever. But think of these coaching moments that I use, and it's something that I constantly practice, which is abundance versus scarcity. There is enough for all of us, and we all can share in this together. And when we do, we actually create more space for everyone to belong. Exactly. And the scarcity mindset takes all of that away. And what you're talking about really helps me see it even in another way, where it's this oneness and this love. In my cheesiest way, I do believe that all we need is love in this world.
I agree.
Because how could we hurt each other if we all had love?
At the end of the day, the scarcity of thinking that somehow these ideas will get diluted or diminished is hubris, because the ideas are strong in themselves. They point to a truth and a reality that can be verified and felt by anybody anywhere. So in that sense, yoga is not in danger. Yoga never has been in danger, never will be in danger. If you wiped out all of the scriptures and all of the Indian subcontinent, our name for this tradition is Sanatana Dharma, which means eternal law or eternal truth. So how can we think that there's a scarcity when this is something that is and will always exist? I think Indians need to be a little more generous in sharing their culture, and they tend to be. Most Indians generally are excited when they see a Caucasian person wearing a sari. Although there are certain Hindu nationalists and maybe even groups in America that get really upset because they call out things as appropriation and all that. In my own experience, my grandmother loves it when my Caucasian girlfriend wears a sari. My people love it when other people try to learn Sanskrit and get involved. And my people love to learn what everyone else has to teach. So I hope that we can all get this abundance mentality you were talking about, where there's enough to go around. There's enough knowledge. We don't have to patent and sell everything.
So I have a sari and I've worn it a few times, and I haven't worn it in years, but I love it. And I think I need a reason to wear it. And I was thinking maybe I should just put it on. I think of this term cultural appropriation. Didn't Swami Vivekananda come here to share?
Yes, exactly. Yoga is known as Sarva Bhumi, meaning it's for the whole world. It's an art for the whole world. It's not like there are Caucasian problems and Indian problems. Iyengar points that out. He says there are just problems.
Right.
You can't say there's like an Irish science and a German science. And yes, the characteristic of those nations influences how they do science, but it's still science.
Look at the COVID-19 vaccine and where it came from. And these scientists developed this for the world, not for just Germans.
Exactly. So this idea, if you came up with a vaccine that could solve a global pandemic, similarly, if you discovered something that can solve the global pandemic of anxiety and depression and suffering, wouldn't it be for the world? There is a way, I think, to respectfully practice other people's culture. I would love to absolve some of the trepidation and reservation that a lot of really well-meaning people here in the West have about practicing yoga by telling that you are meant to have this. Many saints have come over to give you this technology and to give it to you in the most holistic way. So if you want to do bhakti, it's there. If you want to do jnana, it's there. But it's for you. You're meant to have it.
Thank you.
A lot of people will be inspired to go back to India and teach women to read and write. And a lot of people want to bring social empowerment to India. And that's ultimately the goal, that we might bring the best of both our cultures together for a more dignified human experience.
If there are problems globally, then there are problems for all of us to address.
We're all in this together.
Yes, we are. And so thank you again. This has been such a pleasure. I will have all of the links in the notes below to join you in one of your classes, to join you on Patreon, and to listen to more of your incredible lectures that you share so kindly. So excited to be on this journey with you through YogaWorks.
I'll see you Saturday, huh? Have a beautiful day ahead, Monica.
Beautiful day. Thank you for joining me for Yoga Philosophy for Everyday Living. Please learn more about our guests in the show notes and check out their awesome yoga classes. Subscribe, like, and share this podcast with a friend. And please send me your feedback. I would love to hear from you. You can learn more at sparkpluglabs.co.